Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thanks for joining us here in Alaska Weather for this 29th of May broadcast of your Alaska Weather Show. As always, you can find the images from this show online at weather.gov/Alaska. Just scroll down a little bit and you'll see a TV desk icon that'll help you see the images that we are about to talk about here. You can always check your latest forecast using some of that information, but you'll get more up-to-date information through the nighttime and early morning hours and in between shows at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information line, of course. Weather.gov/Alaska is the easy way to find us on your computer there, but an easier way on your phone, and one that might be a little bit more useful, especially as you get into lower signal strength or perhaps you're trying to be careful with your broadband signal. Weather.gov/Alaska. That's the big one. But mobile.weather.gov will give you that lightweight web page. And if you share that link to your home screen, it'll act just like an app. So you can make it your own personal weather tool and check the weather anywhere you need to. If you can't find what you're looking for, whether it's information from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center and flooding information around Koyukuk, the Koyukuk Valley, the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, National Tsunami Warning Center, or any of our forecast offices in Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage, let me know. I'm happy to help you any way I possibly can. Let's take a look at some of the drought conditions in Southeast. We were talking about this a little bit yesterday, and we're going to focus on this red area here. This is D3 extreme drought. So if you're a hydrology junkie, a weather junkie, and you follow the trends, you know this as D3. D3 is bad. Extreme drought is what most of the rest of us would like to talk about here. That means conditions have been abnormally dry, so much so that this has reached into a extreme drought level. So what is drought? Drought is comparing the 30-year average of rainfall, or the amount of precipitation in one area, and comparing that to what you've had over recent times. So right now, because we're in extreme drought, we can understand that the amount of moisture collected over months now has been so severely below the average over that same period that things just aren't working right. And that could be hydroelectric power, it could be drinking water, and it could mean things aren't growing correctly. If you were in the plains and growing crops, this would be really bad and difficult to grow in conditions like this. So yeah, it's that bad. North and east, you can see that levels reach into D2, or severe drought, and even further north you get into the moderate and abnormally dry conditions. But those levels extend really for all of Southeast, so conditions are unusually dry for the entire region, and exceptionally so just south of Petersburg to Craig, Klawock, Heidelberg, and out toward Ketchikan there. So again, be mindful of your water conservation needs there from local officials, and we'll certainly hope for more rain. But just because it has rained certainly doesn't mean that drought conditions have ended. Now, in some places we are seeing a growing fire danger, and some of those include northern parts of Southeast out toward Yakutat, and that could be to some normal dry conditions this time of the year. This is a drier part of the season, of course. For the upper Yukon, the upper Tanana Valley, all the way into the middle Yukon and the lower Koyukuk Valley, higher fire danger conditions are growing in those regions there. This is the update as of May 29th, and as usual, we encourage you to be careful with fire. Check with your local fire officials first before lighting the match or starting your work out there that might require any burning in your area. Satellite picture shows us that deep southerly flow is still upon us there in the western Gulf over Kodiak Island into south central and the Wrangell-St. Elias region, but just to the east, a high-pressure ridge is in charge, and that extends all the way down into the Pacific Northwest. That is keeping sunshine and warm temperatures right over Southeast as we go through the afternoon. Looks like you've got at least another day of that left, so enjoy that while you can. On the west side of that, high pressure sitting out across the western Bering with low pressure here across the Bristol Bay region and the western Gulf. You can see that northerly flow working its way all the way through the central and western Bering. And this is also allowing low pressure to push its way into the upper parts of the Yukon Valley. And watch this area of clouds right here around Arctic Village. You can see that kind of blowing up in the afternoon. High pressure up across the Arctic, working with low pressure across the interior, mainly due to the heating of the day, is helping to push those lower clouds in across the North Slope. So cooler weather up north for sure, but the summertime heat is back in full swing across the interior, and that trend should continue for the next several days as well. High pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf now, 1,024 millibars closer to home. You can see that dashed line indicating a trough of low pressure, and just to the north of that, shower and thunderstorm activity has been firing up around Arctic Village and eastward. Low pressures down across the western Gulf, with that low sitting in a southerly flow. We're getting rainfall around the Kenai Fjords of the western Alaska Range, Lake Iliamna, and all the way down to just about the eastern chain this afternoon. afternoon. Areas around Norton Sound and Nome and St. Lawrence Island picking up some showers there, and there's plenty of clouds out around the Bering. Looks like that will continue as well. We'll check the aviation forecast here in just a few minutes. Low pressure will kind of reset a little bit tonight across the western Gulf. Neither one of these systems is terribly strong. We might have some gales in the region, especially around Kodiak Island to the Barren Islands and into the northern parts of the Gulf. High pressure will calm things down and keep it so across most of southeast. Look for a mild night for you. In areas of low clouds, drizzle, and some light rainfall will be possible the further north you go, especially as you start tapping into some of that cooler air up across the north slope. A northerly wind across the central and eastern Bering will keep clouds low across the central and eastern chain, and that will include St. Paul and St. George again for Thursday. For Flying Day, that's not the news you want to hear, but it is kind of the standard for summertime, it seems. Drops of rain and drizzle should be expected as you go through your Thursday. Watch for some light rainfall, generally around Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and then into Prince William Sound. But northern parts of Cook Inlet, generally north of Kenai, all the way into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys, should be generally dry, save for some mountain showers that could pop up in the heat of the day. Notice once again, southeast is in the clear. You'll have minimal clouds. Most of that will hover from about the capital city and northward. Anything south of that looks pretty nice. You will have some rain well offshore, it looks like. Showers will develop across the upper Yukon Valley. Watch for a better chance for shower and thunderstorm activity, though, to be around the Kobuk and Noatak Valley and out towards Galena, perhaps the lower Koyukuk, and into parts of the upper Kuskokwim, perhaps at its most southern extent. A little bit better chance for that as we get into Friday's weather, though. That dashed line once again drops a little bit further south. Once again, that's our area of heating of the day that generates an area of low pressure, and in the afternoon helps to spark those shower and thunderstorms. So we'll be keeping watch on generally this vicinity here, all the way from the Yukon Valley and then just northward into the Seward Peninsula. South of that, it looks like we'll see generally showery conditions there, especially along the coast, and some of that might even turn into rain. If this ridge that has been protecting southeast drifts just a little bit to the east and south, that will remove that protection you've had, and clouds and then rainfall could return to southeast fairly quickly there. Low pressure will be sitting across southern parts of Bristol Bay at 998 millibars, and we've got a high out here across the western chain that's keeping that northerly flow intact. One thing to note, though, if that high doesn't get out of the way quite as fast as we think it will, well, southeast, you might start off your Friday with another nice day. Here's a look at temperatures there for Thursday morning. Then mid to upper 40s for southeast, south central, not too far behind. 45 in Kodiak, 40s for Dillingham and King Salmon. Bethel, you're looking at temperatures in the mid 40s in the morning, and 40s and 50s for the middle Tanana Valley. Places like McGrath will be fairly mild. Up north, though, you can see the impact of that cooler air coming in. The temps back in the 20s overnight. High temperatures for your Thursday then will be fairly mild. For the upper 60s and lower 70s we see across the central and eastern interior. Eagle and Northway both above the 70-degree mark, and many in southern parts of southeast will be right there. Petersburg looks like one of them, and Haines and Skagway will be fairly mild as well. 59 around Yakutat, mid-50s for Prince William Sound, 50 around Makoryuk, and St. Lawrence Island a little bit cooler, as well as places like Shishmaref, still in the 30s, with Point Hope and Point Lay pushing the 50-degree mark. Overnight lows Friday morning back in the 20s. Again, many areas up north will be below freezing, but once you get south of the Brooks Range, we're back in the 40s and 50s. Galena could hit 53, 52 in Tanana, lower to mid-50s for Fairbanks, 40s for Northway and Eagle, South Central, even Talkeetna back in the mid-40s for Friday morning. Southeast, expect highs, or lows I should say, in the 40s and 50s. Kodiak about 44, St. Paul 37. High temperatures on Friday once again will be fairly mild for the interior. You're looking at temperatures in the upper 60s and lower 70s, 30s and 40s from the north slope, a little bit milder for your Friday afternoon, 54 in Nome. Southeast, expect highs in the 50s and 60s and cooling down just a bit with clouds, 52 in Kodiak. Sandpoint 47, Dutch Harbor and Alaska also looking at temps in the 40s. For climate, if you extend this out to 8 to 14 days, trends tell us that conditions will be warmer than normal, or at least possibly so, generally around the Brooks Range and northward toward the Chukchi Coast, and around south central, southwest, Kodiak Island, and parts of southeast have a chance of being warmer than normal as well. But what about precipitation? Well, conditions could be wetter than normal in the north and northwest.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to aviation weather now. IFR concerns will continue at around St. Paul and St. George through the central and eastern Aleutians, and mainly along the Pacific coast of the Alaska Peninsula, all the way just east of Lake Iliamna and into the western Alaska Range. Across the western Gulf, watch for widespread IFR conditions there and encroaching on Kodiak Island and certainly on the eastern side and over the Barrens. You'll notice it pushing in toward the Kenai Fjords region, maybe not quite as far north as Seward. Most of Prince William Sound looks to be MVFR, and then most of southeast will hold on to VFR conditions, as well as a large swath of the interior all the way to the west coast and up into the northwest. But once you get north of the Brooks Range, it does look like we'll see fairly widespread IFR across the Chukchi Coast or very close to it, and then also across the Beaufort Seacoast with marginal conditions up around Utqiagvik and just south. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, watch for IFR to spread westward across the North Slope communities there, all the way west of Utqiagvik, not quite to Wainwright. MVFR will linger offshore there. IFR conditions down through the Bering Strait. St. Matthew looks to be IFR, but St. George and St. Paul will be under marginal conditions. IFR down through the central and western chain. Also around Cape Newenham, watch for IFR conditions. MVFR lingering and lurking around the Bristol Bay region, but most of the interior remains VFR with the threat of convection there across the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and also across the lower Koyukuk and the middle Yukon. Watch for IFR conditions around Prince William Sound, down the Kenai Fjords into the Barrens and over Kodiak Island, all the way down to Chignik and northward just east of Lake Iliamna. Marginal conditions will remain close to southeast, but VFR is expected to be maintained across the Inside Passage all the way to the north. You'll notice IFR swinging northward overnight, Thursday night into Friday, and that will cover up a large chunk of Prince William Sound and just offshore of most of southeast, the outer coast south of Sitka down to the Dixon entrance. Probably we'll see conditions lowering as the day goes on. IFR lingers across the North Slope. We're looking for Nunivak Island, St. Paul, St. George, all looking at IFR there, and hit and miss IFR from Chignik southward to just about Sand Point, and the eastern side of Kodiak Island will also remain low. By the afternoon, a lot of that should improve. For the interior, you'll notice a little more MVFR developing around the Alaska Range, especially toward Mentasta Pass and generally east of Tanita Pass, but not Tanita Pass itself. Portage Pass will improve a little bit, and IFR will linger around Yakutat, Icy Cape, and Cape Fairweather. South of that, the Inside Passage and the outer coast will go down to MVFR. IFR conditions for the central and the eastern and the western chain, and watch for marginal conditions up into the Bering Strait with widely scattered areas of convection developing in the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions. Really, tomorrow doesn't look so bad for most of your favorite passes. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, we're going to call VFR at this point. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal, but of course we've seen worse. Rainy Pass should see a little bit of a lowering as the day goes on, starting out at VFR, so get moving early if you can. Windy Pass, VFR travels expected tomorrow. Isabel Pass, conditions look pretty good as you head out through your Thursday. Mentasta Pass we're going to call VFR, watching for some changes on Friday. Tanita Pass we expect to see visual flight rule maintained, and Portage Pass probably lowers as the day goes on to IFR. So if you can get through with MVFR, you're going to be good in the morning. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see pretty good flying weather as we go into your day tomorrow. These freezing levels show a considerable amount of heat punching up through southeast, with a ridge of high pressure there all the way up the Alcan border. Levels across the Beaufort Seacoast down around 2,000 feet, but again, a very quick rise as you head southward. And levels across western Alaska range between 4,000 and 6,000 feet, with really most of the interior holding at about 6,000 to 8,000 feet. So a lot of warm air in place. Icing potential, therefore, is pretty high up there. You're going to have to go around 8,000 to 10,000 feet or higher to get into any isolated moderate, it looks like right now. Main concern will be for the threat for convection here across western Alaska. And again, isolated severe icing is possible with any thunderstorm activity in the region. So keep that in mind and steer well clear of that. It does look like most of this, again, will not be cumbersome to folks flying around for general aviation. Low pressure sitting just south of the Alaska Peninsula, a very broad trough controlling our weather now with southerly flow into the interior at 65 knots, wrapping around into the west coast at 50 knots, and north and westerlies coming to the eastern Beaufort Seacoast here, helping to keep a trough going across the lower 48. We are moving into a pattern change, though, and it looks like this low is on the move eastward, so we'll get into a little bit of a northerly flow perhaps by the end of the weekend and early next week. For now, southerlies rule the roost, 10 to 15 knots for the interior and 20 to about 35 knots for most of the south central and southwest. Southerlies over southeast, and offshore winds for the west coast at 3,000 feet. Not a big change. A broad easterly flow you'll see across the interior, keeping things pretty mild. Easterly wind across the North Slope up to 15, and south and easterly winds over Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula 20 to 35, and southerlies coming into southeast Alaska there. So what about turbulence? South central, probably looking at the worst, a considerable moderate over parts of the Anchorage Bowl, the Shelikof Strait region, Lake Iliamna and southwest, and the central chain.
On March 11, 2011,
A 9.0 magnitude earthquake off the Pacific coast of Japan generated a tsunami. This series of ocean waves sped towards the island nation, with waves reaching 24 feet high. The result was devastation and utter destruction. Towns were engulfed by water and swept away. Farmland was flooded. Tens of thousands of lives were lost. The National Police Agency reported damages to hundreds of roads, bridges, and more than 100,000 buildings. The surging water flooded rivers and destroyed harbors. In some areas along the coast, tsunami waves reached 6 miles inland. Tsunamis not only cause severe damage when they first strike land, but also as the water recedes back to sea. Tsunamis can inflict this type of damage because of some unique features. As tsunami waves travel across ocean basins, they may be as little as a few centimeters high, but they extend down to the ocean floor. This is different than traditional waves, which are only surface features. Tsunamis can also travel hundreds of miles per hour in the open ocean. As these waves approach a coast, the shallowing ocean floor slows the waves down and pushes the water mass upwards. The quicker the ocean floor transitions from deep to shallow, the greater potential for a higher wave height. So, tsunamis that experience this sudden shift into shallow water can have the height and momentum to pack a serious punch. Unfortunately, Japan found itself in this scenario. This image shows how abruptly the Japanese islands rise out of the ocean. Other coastal areas in the region have much more gradual slopes. The earthquake on March 11th was the most powerful known to hit Japan, and the tsunami it created had the necessary ingredients to make it such a deadly and destructive force. "80 miles east of Japan, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake rocks the ocean floor. This disturbance causes a transfer of energy from the seafloor to the ocean, generating a series of ocean waves, known as a tsunami. In about 20 minutes, waves strike the Japanese coastline. Other nations go on high alert because the tsunami will propagate or spread throughout the Pacific Ocean. As the tsunami radiates outward from Japan, it encounters a variety of ocean features, such as ridges and underwater volcanoes, which guide the tsunami and create a complex pattern of scattering and reflective waves. In 8 hours, the waves reach the Hawaiian Islands, and in 9.5 hours, they hit the west coast of the United States. In 16 hours, the tsunami reaches the Indian Ocean and New Zealand, and by 22 hours, the entire Pacific Ocean had been affected. The impact of a tsunami can be highly variable because of the complicated interactions with ocean features and coastline elements. Wave height and speed will differ from place to place. Since tsunamis can be hundreds of miles long and travel thousands of miles away from where they originated, they are considered a worldwide threat when they form. These are the sounds of a tsunami warning. They alert residents that a killer wave is about to strike. These sirens, however, are just a small part of the sophisticated warning systems that played a role in Japan and in the US during the Pacific Ocean tsunami in March 2011. Most tsunamis are generated by an undersea earthquake. Fortunately, Japan has one of the most advanced earthquake early warning systems in the world. It detects tremors, calculates the epicenter, and sends out warnings from over 1,000 seismographs scattered throughout the country. The Japan Meteorological Agency issues the warnings and sends alerts to television and radio channels, the internet, and mobile phone networks. When the earthquake struck 80 miles offshore, warnings were generated in about 3 seconds. The tsunami warnings came 3 minutes later. These take longer because more complex calculations are involved and must factor in ocean data. Since the first tsunami wave struck the coastline within 20 minutes, the advanced warning provided some residents with crucial minutes to reach a safe area. While the earthquake sent powerful tsunami waves westward toward Japan, the tsunami also propagated east into the Pacific Ocean. Here, warnings are issued by the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, operated by NOAA in Hawaii. NOAA maintains a large network of buoys with ocean floor sensors that are strategically positioned in the earthquake-prone zones of the Pacific. This system collects vital ocean data for tsunami forecasting. On March 11th, only 25 minutes after the earthquake struck, the first buoy station measured the tsunami and relayed information to Hawaii. Scientists used this data to run models and issue forecasts and warnings to nations throughout the Pacific. From there, local emergency managers decided what actions were appropriate to take for public safety. The earthquake and resulting tsunami devastated the Japanese coastline, causing damage that will take years to repair. While we can't prevent these forces of nature from happening, our early warning systems can help us prepare for the dangers headed our way.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And time for a look at your sea ice update. We've been talking about the marginal ice zone around the Beaufort Seacoast. This continues to advance westward toward Utqiagvik and Dead Horse, and you'll also notice significant changes here across the Chukchi Coast. These two areas will probably come together in the next week or so. However, there's a lot of pack ice, multi-year ice here well to the north, and as this area becomes a little more unstable or more open, the pack ice will be a little more likely to move around. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that is moving and how close to the coast that is getting over the next week or so. In the meantime, you can get the latest information anytime from the Alaska Sea Ice Program, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for more. Here's a look at the winds in southeast now. Most areas are going to be generally calm or quiet. Look for a generally south wind, though, in the Lynn Canal, 20 knots with gusts up to 35, 4-foot seas there in that south wind. Otherwise, 10 to 15 knots in most areas and somewhat small seas on the inside, 2 to 3 feet. And you're looking at about 6-foot seas on the outside for Thursday. That'll come into a little bit more of a southwesterly flow south of Cross Sound all the way to the Dixon entrance on Friday. South winds continue on the inside, 10 to 15 with 2 to 3-foot seas. And across the outer coast, about 6 to 7-foot seas in most cases there, 8-foot seas there around Port Alexander and outside of Sitka and also around Cape Fairweather. North and easterlies across the Kenai Peninsula and outside of the Gulf and inside of Prince William Sound, you're looking at about 15 to 30 knots in all areas. 25 to 30 in Cook Inlet from the north and east. 5 to 9-foot seas there, easterlies on the eastern Barrens and across the northern Gulf. 25 to 30 there with an 8 to 9-foot sea. 3-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound. That becomes more easterly with time on Friday, a 15-knot wind there, and south and southeasterlies a little bit stronger outside of Hitchinbrook entrance, up to 20 knots. 5 to 7-foot seas around the Barren Islands, east and south wind there, 15 to 20, and northeasterlies settle out just a little bit for most of the rest of Cook Inlet, 15 knots there from the north and east with a 3-foot sea. Around Bristol Bay, look for a 15 to 20 knot wind, 3-foot seas around the bay itself. Look for easterly winds across the western Gulf, 15 to 20, with 8-foot seas just east of Kodiak. A little bit of a stronger northeasterly flow, though, right inside of Shelikof Strait. Look for seas up to 8 feet in that case. For Friday, wind should settle out a little bit in Shelikof Strait. Look for 3-foot seas and diminishing there for Friday. Southeasterlies across the Alaska Peninsula. That means a 15 to 20 knot wind in most areas. 2 to 4-foot seas for the Bering Sea coast. You'll see seas up to 5 to 8 feet south of Akiak to Sand Point on Friday afternoon. Look for northerly winds to remain fairly constant across the central and eastern chain, and you'll notice where we have our gap flows, you could see some of those higher seas sneaking through between Atka and Nikolsky. 8-foot seas on the Pacific coast side, a 9 to 10-foot sea on the Bering Sea coast side. Easterlies for Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, out toward Nikolsky. Otherwise, the north and northwesterly wind should be in charge with high pressure to your west. For Friday, a north and westerly wind continues. It lets off just a little bit and seas diminish somewhat to your north. 20 to 25 knots in all areas, and a north and northwesterly wind will persist. 7 to 9 foot seas at their greatest. Look for 5 to 6 foot seas around the Pacific coast on Friday. For the west coast, northeasterlies around Norton Sound, 15 knots and 2 foot seas there. 15 to 25 north of Macoriac to St. Lawrence Island. Around St. Matthews, St. Paul, and St. George, a 7 knot seas expected with that north and northeasterly flow. Kuskokwim Delta could see slightly more protection there. Still looking at a northeast wind though at 15 knots and a 5 foot sea. That's down to 4 foot seas there on Friday with the easterly flow. Otherwise, north and easterly winds will continue anywhere from 15 to 25 and 5 to 7 foot seas in most of the area. For the north slope, easterlies still blowing across the Beaufort, 20 to 25, 4 foot seas north of Kaktovik, and you'll see a north and easterly flow around the Chukchi. That water's open, 3 foot seas expected there on Thursday with a 20 knot wind, 25 knots through the Bering Strait itself with a 5 foot sea. No big change there on Friday. A north and easterly wind down the Chukchi there still gives us a 5 foot sea and 25 knot winds. Winds come up a little bit more from Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. 8 foot seas there in the open waters and 25 to 30 knots blowing in from the east. Recapping tonight's weather, high pressure still in charge of southeast, and the weather looks pretty calm and quiet there tonight. Elsewhere, that southerly flow is pushing moisture into Prince William Sound, the Wrangell St. Elias, all the way out toward Bristol Bay and the west coast, working with low pressure even further west. That'll continue to drag an area of low pressure across the interior that could spark more showers, possibly some thunderstorms into the early evening hours. Watch for some areas of fog thanks to northerly winds coming ashore on the north slope. A better chance for shower and storm activity around the Kobuk and Noatak Valley down to the Koyukuk in the middle Yukon for your daytime tomorrow. Showers will still be possible around the interior, especially the east, and a better chance for some light rain around Prince William Sound, southwest, but not for southeast. Another dry days in the offing for you. For your Friday, a more widespread area of shower and storm activity will be found around the Yukon Valley and perhaps over the Tanana Valley as well, out toward the Seward Peninsula and just inland of Norton Sound. Watch for a better chance for some light rain to develop in parts of southeast for Friday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.